Okay, hi. I don't think there's any new people, so you guys already know me, Rachel Torres. Yeah, my fan club. So our last breakout session of Amplify 2022. Yes. Kaiti Carpenter, Spencer shared yesterday in the keynote about how Under Armour is transforming what it means to go for a run with technology. And Kaiti is the head of digital product from Under Armour, and she's gonna speak with Amplitude's own Rachel Herrera and give you more detail, more advice that you can take back to your teams today. So let's hear it for Kaiti and Rachel.
Okay. Awesome. Hello, everyone. Thanks for being here.
Hello. Oh, we've got people coming. Okay, wonderful.
Yeah.
Just get into this stool. Okay. So, thank you so much for talking to me.
Yes.
And welcome all of you guys. So, if you're not familiar, we have this monthly series that I've hosted called Coffee Chat. And I love to do it because I get to talk to amazing people like Kaiti. And I think it's like we get to talk about the messy middle. You know, we're not too rehearsed. We have talked about what we're talking about today. We have notes, so just gonna demystify that a little bit. But I really just wanted to feel like we're having a real conversation in front of all of you guys. I don't think we'll have time for Q&A, unfortunately, but we'd love it if you could grab us after if you want to chat about anything we talk about. But yeah, so a little bit about me. I'm on the professional services team at Amplitude. If you've worked with our team, if you've gone through an implementation with us, you've probably met some of my wonderful colleagues. And we've got Kaiti here. Kaiti, tell us a little bit about what you do at Under Armour.
Yeah, so Kaiti Carpenter, Director of Digital Product at Under Armour. So I lead Map My Run and Map My Fitness, all the flavors of Map My. Those are all owned by Under Armour. So right now we are working on figuring out how we bring that into the physical world. How do we mesh those two together instead of just having the digital app over here and the physical product over there?
Yeah, such an important thing. I think half of the conversations I've had today in some form or fashion is I've got all this stuff over here and I've got all this stuff over here and I need it to come together and I don't know how to do it. And I said, you should come to our talk because we're going to talk about it. So it's all about data building bridges. It's about bringing the old new, it's bringing the left to the right, et cetera. So you had this really important decision to make. Tell us about the decision. Tell us why you're sort of in this conundrum. What bridge did you need to build?
Okay, yeah, so we talked a little bit about in the past, Under Armour also owned MyFitnessPal, and when I first joined Under Armour, there was a problem with our data in the sense that we weren't very good at looking at it. It was there, and leadership would ask us, how was that thing that you launched? And we would say, we don't really know. And so that was the problem we were trying to solve. Amplitude was the solution. They said, the proposal was if we move to Amplitude, the structures will be clearer, the tool will be easier to use, we'll be able to answer all the questions that we have with any launch given. So then the problem became, okay, well, we're on this old data structure and we want to transition to this new data structure. MyFitnessPal was already using it. And we came across a lot of friction with okay, well, we want to use our existing data format, structure, syntax, all of that stuff. But once we move into the same tool, we also want to be able to see the data across both entities and be able to make sense of it. So there was a lot of discussion about well, what do we do? Do we stick with what we have today? Do we adopt what they have? Do we do something in the middle? And just some best practice stuff there. What we learn, these are sort of the learnings that I've gathered over the years, is to me the best approach to that sort of problem is picking one existing structure. So we basically followed what MyFitnessPal was doing. Part of that decision making was mostly just because they had the bigger audience, and so it was and they were already in the tool, and the pro of that approach is that you have an expert, right? So they were already doing the structures and the syntaxes and everything. They had already learned some things, and so we were just borrowing from their learnings. It was a lot more, there was a lot more effort on our part, but I think that those are the sorts of things that you just have to accept. It's okay, we're gonna have more effort right now so that in the future there's gonna be, it's gonna be a lot more seamless.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think taking the existing that is working, I I think what's worse is if you take the existing because it exists.
Yes,
And then you just
exactly.
sort of say, well, that's the status quo. We're going to take it over and we're going to continue marching forward. So, and what are some maybe like the cons of doing some of that? Like, is there a con to it? And how did you kind of decide that that was the right solution? Was it because the data was cleaner or just?
Yeah. So when we were first making that decision, there was just like a lot of use cases that we wanted to account for. So like one example is like in MapMy, the main action we want people to take is save a workout. Whereas in MyFitnessPal, it was logging food. So it was like, there's just some inherent differences in terms of how you might organize the data, how you might name the data differently depending on what the user action is. So there was, I think there were some adjustments that MapMy had to make in order to be able to match the structures. So like that wasn't ideal.
Yeah.
But like just thinking about other approaches, so like other options would have been going with like a whole new structure.
Right, just burning it down.
Yeah,
Light
exactly.
the match,
Making both of us do the work.
Viking funeral, goodbye.
Yes, exactly. And I don't think that was necessary. We didn't need to kill anyone.
No,
Viking funeral necessary. So yeah, it was like, why make one of these entities do a ton of work when we can just have, save a little bit of time and only make MapMy do the work to match one.
Yeah.
And in that case, I think we were fortunate that one of the approaches that exists really did work.
Exactly.
For us. I mean, the other alternative is to do like a hybrid approach where it's like, well, we're going to keep some of our structures, you get to keep some of your structures, but I really don't recommend that one at all. That's specifically because it's like, okay, now you really don't have any experts, right? Because someone coming in new is like, well, I see we do it this way here, and then we do it that way there.
Yeah.
And then if you're asking me, it's like, oh, well, do it my way. And then if you're asking you, it's like, do it her way. So
Right.
it's just like a big old mess. And then the data becomes unusable, and then you're back to square one. So
Yeah, definitely. Because I think when you make any of those data type decisions, especially when you're blending, you always, I think, have to think about the adoption piece of it.
Yes.
Because you're doing all this with the eventual hope that everybody at your company is going to live in this data and it's going to be wonderful. So I appreciate that you took that into consideration as well, because I think it sometimes gets overlooked for sure.
yes, yeah.
And when you make those decisions, it's lots of conversations, I imagine. What roles do you typically bring in? Because I can see it sort of going in 1,000 directions, and you bring in too many and you get too many opinions versus too few, et cetera.
Yeah, so I mean, in that sense, the decision-making process was an extremely small group, but I think leading up to that moment, there was a lot of interviews that we wanted to do, just consulting with anyone that's going to be consuming the data, generating the data, analyzing the data, manipulating the data. So you kind of want to gather all your use cases up front, understand how people are using the data today, and that may not be the same way they're using it in the future. So you also have to think about your future user. This person may not exist yet. And it may be you. It's you today are different than the future you who's going to be using this data because the data is so much cleaner.
Yeah.
As an example, our design team never looked at the data. I mean, maybe that's little confidential information. Yeah, but they didn't look at the data, and I didn't blame them. It was confusing, complex. They just would be like, hey, they were curious, obviously, but they would go to the analytics team, maybe product team. But in the future, the idea was we make this so easy that we can enable the design team to look up the whatever questions they have and answer their own questions, and then come and bring even more innovative approaches to whatever we're doing. So that was definitely a part of it. But like to answer your question, when it came to the decision making, that was like a very small group. It was like product, the engineers implementing the solution, and like that was really it. And it was just like a constant conversation, like staying really close with each other to make sure that what I was conveying was being interpreted properly, and then looking at the data and making sure it was all making sense.
Yeah, and with the small group, because I agree, I think when you get into those modes, it's sometimes a bit of like analysis paralysis, because there's so many decisions to be made. I mean, where did you start? Like, how did you all sort of create the rules of working in that environment?
Yeah, so this is definitely a good question because it's not really a straightforward answer.
Yeah.
So thinking back, it was like we gathered the use cases, we had done all our research, okay, now we're ready to make a decision, and it was like, well, what do we do? We talked, and honestly, I think I was a little bit in that paralysis moment, and I remember the engineer working on it, he just made a decision and just like dumped it all into, so we were on GA before, and he started porting it over into our new project in Amplitude. And he didn't tell me he was going to do it either. I like came in that morning and I was like, hey, there's data in our project and it looks like all the old stuff and nothing is different. And he's like, yeah, we need to get the data into the project and then we can like start seeing how it's flowing, making sure it's flowing properly. Mm-hmm. And that was like actually a really great approach so that we could actually QA that like the pipelines are working first.
Right. At least put that to bed. Like,
yeah, exactly.
That works.
Yes. So from there, it was like, then it sort of evolved. It's like, okay, so now we need to apply the new syntax. How are we going to do that at scale, right? Because, we had like, at the time, billions of events. So it was like, we can't just like do one at a time update. Is there like a find and replace sort of approach to this?
Mm-hmm. And how do you think about like consistency there? Because I see that as like the big lever to just make that process so much faster. Is like we'll talk to customers and they'll sort of hem and haw over what literal events they should pick or what the format should be. And my advice to them is always just make it consistent because our brains are pretty good at like catching patterns,
yes.
especially in like the analysis mode. So how did you guys think about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's like my mantra when going through these sorts of things.
Love it.
Yeah, consistency is key. And then that's also why we kept the group so small because I was thinking like if we have too many decision makers or even just like contributors, not even decision makers, but contributors in that small group, you start to see differences in logic when you're executing on that syntax and the formatting and whatnot. Mm-hmm. And that's when you start to like see small differences here and there, and that's when your data can start to get messy. It's kind of like a piece of fabric as it starts to fray at the ends, like eventually,
yes.
the whole thing unravels. So yeah, honestly, like if you can keep the execution, the executors and the decision makers really small, that logic can stay really tight, and so you can see that reflected in the syntax across all of your data structures.
Awesome. Well, when you have made all those very easy, very simple, very straightforward decisions that I'm sure took you no time at all, then what do you do next? Because you've made the decision on how to bridge the gap. I said the titles. But then how do you keep working forward? Because there's going to be the day where you launch the new feature, you launch the new product, or you want to bring in more data. Like, talk to me about some of the hierarchies there.
So important there is just documentation. So document what that logic is, right? It's really easy when you have that small group to just like iterate really fast, make some decisions. Make some changes even to what your initial intentions were. So maybe you like created all that documentation ahead of time, but then as like, time progressed through transitioning, things change. Making sure that once you're sort of like, okay, we think we're at a good spot. We are now blended together.
The bridge has been built.
Yes, the bridge is there. Then document like, this is how you get on the bridge. This is what you do when you're on the bridge, that sort of stuff. So yeah, documentation is really important there. And then obviously also like getting everyone that is there at that is using the data today, getting them up to speed on what the new best practices are, because breaking old habits is hard also. So just kind of like doing the whole road show internally of like, here's the new and improved. You're gonna love it.
Here's why.
Yeah, exactly.
Very cool. And that's kind of one of my like when I work with customers, we go through the effort, the slog. And then at the end, they're like, done. And I'm like, no. Now we have to go sell this.
Yes.
Now we have to go make it exciting because it's not an if you build it, they will come type deal. And there's only so much top-down pressure that can happen. Like you really do have to like do the so what exercise with all the different groups for sure.
But what's great, I think, is if you build, if you organize the data in such a way that it's clear. And Amplitude's a great tool, so the tool is there. It's easy to use. That part's taken care of. It kind of sells itself. Like they come to you with a question, and you send them a chart, and you go like, you can mess with that. Like there's lots of different ways to answer these questions, and then people start to get curious because they realize they are enabled. They have the tool available to them to answer these questions, and their curiosity sort of just like self-perpetuates.
Awesome. I love that. That's the vision. That's the dream. That's what we're selling. That's why we have a conference, right? And I know Amplitude is the most important thing in my world. Excuse me. But in this scenario, it's likely not the only kind of data decision thing, right? There's probably some pipelines, like you said. There's downstream things. There's probably marketing targeting. tell me about that. Like, how do you fit all of that together in these larger conversations about actually ideally resulting in using of the data?
Yes.
But I imagine there's quite a technology stack you have to consider.
Yeah, so that's kind of like our new problem set. We recently, that was sort of an old problem. We merged. Data's great now, love it. And now we are, like I said, kind of trying to blend the physical and digital worlds. And with that, there were previous decisions that were made. So now it's not just like, oh, we have to smash our data together, but also we need to smash our systems together. Mm-hmm. And there's just like conversations about like what CDP do we go with, and who's the decision owner here, because I certainly am a stakeholder. MarTech is definitely a stakeholder. Marketing technology is a stakeholder. And so that is like figuring out who owns the decision ultimately, even though, I am highly impacted. Let's say, my team generates the data and we use the data. Mm-hmm. Other teams in the company are in the same boat. And so who wins? That's kind of the stuff that we're talking through now. To give an example, like with the CDP thing, we, I guess you kind of got to follow the money sometimes, and so brand ends up winning that. Yeah, brand ended up winning that argument with the CDP. But at that point, it was like the cost is on our side, mm-hmm. and the work is on both of our sides. So we were ready to go to migrate over to the new CDP. Brand was not, and so we kind of had this conversation of like, well, maybe if the cost is if you're going to be the blocker for the work, maybe the cost should follow the ultimate decision owner. But I think that was an example of where we were able to use data being the money, right? Like that's data too. So if like that helped us make the decision, it was like, okay, yeah, like we'll own the cost and we're not going to do it for another year. And so we're like, okay, sounds good. See you in a year.
Yeah, I mean, but I think those are the conversations that, while like, for example, the things that John talked about, they're really cool, but I love that they talked about like the financing and the budgeting and like the allocating and setting up the dominoes.
Definitely,
so
that definitely resonated.
Anything can actually happen, because it's not this magical, moneyless world where we're driven by product initiatives. Yes, at the end of the day. The almighty dollar always wins. Wonderful. Well, I usually ask my guests one final question at the end of our chat, because I want to make sure you guys have time to get energized, go see Hassan Minaj. I'm so excited about that. What Amplitude features do you feel like helped you best in this conundrum, in this environment, in this world that you were living in?
If it's not obvious, govern was really critical to all of this syntax and formatting stuff, specifically because, I think in the GA world, we had to do a lot of releases to fix analytic bugs. And with Govern, you can just go into the tool, fix it in Amplitude. All of your data consumers now have the new clean version, and engineers don't have to, stop what they're doing, insert this bug to get this fixed. Certainly, we like to go back and fix it in the code, but that it was great to not be dependent on releases when we had that sort of stuff come up.
Definitely.
Also, notebooks. I love
me a good notebook.
That's right. Physical and digital. So I use notebooks all the time to build business cases, and like I'll legit go into a meeting with a notebook and be like, here are the charts. This is why we should do this. Yes.
Awesome. I love to hear that. We didn't tell her to say that. Just want to be very clear. Great. And what about like what's next on your Amplitude journey? Anything you're looking forward to? Anything today you heard that you were like, oh, I need that?
Opening speech, I'm so excited about the marketing stuff.
Yes.
Cannot wait to get my hands on that. Experiment is definitely, we are absolutely going to be, mark my words, within the next year, we're getting on Experiment.
You'll be on that stage talking about Experiment.
That's right.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Kaiti, for chatting with me. Oh, no, it's not quite the morning, but we still, hopefully some of y'all had your coffee. If you enjoyed our chat, and you want to attend the next one, we have these monthly. They're the third Thursday of every month. The next one, I'm talking to Ibrahim Bashar. He spoke this morning about our product roadmap. And we're going to talk about like peeling away the onion, because there is this almighty question of how does my product metric align to revenue? And getting to that answer is quite complicated, and it requires a lot of peeling back. So we're going to chat about that. So if you'd like to register, please scan that. And thank you so much.
Thank you
really
so much
appreciate
for
it.
having me. This is awesome.
Thank you all.
Thank you.